This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raz Shafer.
Hey, what's up, guys? This is Raz Shafer with My Campaign Coach. And as we've told you guys a couple weeks ago, we're changing up the podcast format in year 2. We're alternating between our interviews and a little bit more Q&A monologue stuff that I'm bringing to you on the off weeks. And the idea there is that you get all the benefit of the interviews that you've got to know and love over the last year, but we also get to take a deeper dive into specific subjects. And I'm taking submissions as far as through Facebook and email and different ideas from folks both on my personal Facebook and on the My Campaign Coach page as far as what we should talk about. And so I've been getting a lot of good stuff there, and so we're going to use that to guide some of our topics today. And we're going to be talking a lot about how to vet candidates, which coming off of the Roy Moore defeat last night in Alabama, that's definitely a heavy topic that a lot of people are concerned with. And second, we're going to be talking about campaign organization and the logistical side of how you build a rock-solid campaign. So we're going to be talking a lot about that today. But first, I want to give you guys a heads up about some changes we made to our courses online. And the nice thing is, coming into Christmas and coming off of our filing deadline here in Texas, we got a lot of candidates that need some help and that are running as a first-timers. And so we want to make this stuff even more affordable. So we've actually changed the pricing structure significantly. Our advanced candidate course, if you want to buy it and have lifetime access, that's going to be $249 for you to purchase that. That's been the rate that we've had the coupon rate for in the past, but that's now going to be our official rate. So $249 to have lifetime access to the course, which is over 12 hours of video, lots of downloads and templates, as well as every other week we have a live group coaching session. And you've got, if you want to do it monthly, if you just need a shorter term access to it than lifetime, you can do it for $49 a month. So we try to make that really affordable. So if you're looking for what to buy a candidate for Christmas, this is a great way to make a donation to their campaign, to buy this for them or to give them some money so they can purchase it. Because I promise you, the work we put into this, it's going to give big benefits to their candidacy. All right, so I'm not going to really go into the details of the Roy Moore race. If you care about it, you've been paying attention to it, and you know way more than I can tell you about the race. One thing that is for sure is there were allegations that came out about his background that people did not know or were not widely aware of during the primary and before the Senate race. And they definitely did a lot to tank his candidacy. Unquestionably, those allegations and his response to them were a lot of why he ended up losing that race, why there were so many write-ins and why he lost that. So a lot of people have been asking me, how, Raz, do we avoid endorsing or supporting candidates that have this kind of baggage out there? And in Roy Moore's case, that one's a little bit more difficult because he'd been in the public life and public eye for decades, really. And he had run for statewide office multiple times. He'd been been Supreme Court Chief Justice for a couple times. And so a lot of people assumed that if there was something bad about him out there, that it would have come out before now. And in some of those cases, there's been rumored it was kind of open secrets around the Alabama Capitol that this stuff was out there about him, but it just wasn't publicly known. So in those kind of cases, it is really tough when you're talking about somebody that has been quote unquote vetted several times before. But for most people, the vetting comes when they're a first-time candidate or when they're jumping to a new level of candidacy. They're their first time on the state or the federal side. And so we really want to make sure that we know the truth about these candidates that we're working with and supporting. And there's really a couple different things you can do. And I really want to bring on Joanne Fleming, who's a friend of mine out in East Texas, who was a rock star at vetting candidates and quite possibly one of the most intimidating candidate interrogators that I've ever seen. I sure wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of her interrogations. But we're going to bring her on sometime soon to talk about it. But a couple of the strategies that she uses when she is vetting candidates is one, consultants, staff, nobody is allowed in the room except for the candidate themselves. They get their panel of grassroots activists, in her case, together that are interviewing these candidates, and nobody else is allowed in the room other than them. It's all the candidate. That's who they care about. That's who they're voting for. That's who they're endorsing. So they want to make sure that they don't have the handlers and the helpers helping feed answers or giving cues or anything else. It's all the candidate. Secondly, they don't allow anybody to have access to the question that they ask ahead of time. They are very public about the principles they care about and about the policies that they've been fighting on, but they're not going to give their question list. Under no circumstance will they give it out to the candidate or staff. These are questions, by and large, that the candidate should be able to have an answer to already, should already know their answer, or should be able to formulate one quickly. These are not gotcha questions. These are fair, but they don't want the candidate to be able to have a canned response. They want them to actually think. They want to be able to see that process and hear them as they're working through, in many cases, just using their principles that they hold to figure out an answer to the question specifically that's being asked. Next, they tell them, look, if we're going to endorse you, you need to make very clear about telling us anything that we're going to hear about it that's going to come out that's negative about you. If there's a skeleton in your closet, you need to disclose that now. Because if we endorse you and we find out something later, we will make the retraction of that endorsement as publicly painful as possible. So that if you lie to us and say, oh, no, there's nothing, no bankruptcies, no love children, no affairs, no sexual assault, no. If you tell us there's none of those skeletons out there and then we find out that there were, we get blindsided by that, we're going to take that personally when you lie to us, and so we're going to publicly retract in a very painful way, make it clear that you lied to us. And that threat, as you can imagine, really helps to make sure a candidate is going to let them know. Now, they do say, look, we'll keep this confidential. We will keep this between us. We're not going to run to the presses if there is something, but we just need to know. There's plenty of stuff that you may have out there that we'll still consider an endorsement around you with, but we've got to know this stuff, and we just will not allow ourselves to be blindsided. They've had that happen in the past. They have retracted endorsements, and it was very publicly painful for the candidate who they retract the endorsement from. So that kind of threat goes a long way to making sure that people know that they shouldn't lie to you, that they need to dig deep and make sure that nothing's going to come up. Because most times the reasons that candidates end up getting caught in these things is generally small. It's a bankruptcy judgment that they forgot about or forgot to get cleared. It's a lien on their home or something like that they weren't aware of or they'd forgotten about, or something with their spouse's credit, or, whoever knows what it might be. In a lot of cases, it's small and it's not necessarily a deal killer for a good candidate. But if you don't disclose that, if the candidate doesn't really think back about their vulnerabilities and what might be there, then you run into a serious problem area. The other option is, and this is less widely used, but in high liability situations can be helpful, is to tell a candidate, look, as part of our endorsement process, we want to make sure that you've conducted a legitimate vulnerability study, basically self-opposition research, and say, look, if you want us to consider an endorsement, we want to see the work product directly from a legitimate opera research agency that they've looked into you. And we want to see what they found. We want to see the full report from them. We'll sign an NDA, we'll do whatever, but we want to see this before we'll consider endorsing. That's not as common and probably would not come into play until you start talking about a statewide or federal level. But if you're putting your name out there, especially as an organization or as a high-profile individual, and you want to make sure you don't get blindsided, then that's one way to help protect yourself and be able to say, look, either we're going to commission this or you need to pay for it. You should already have done this. I really believe that every candidate needs to have legitimate self-opposition research. They need to have that vulnerability study to look and see where those holes might be or where they might be attacked. And so hopefully they've already done that. They can provide the work product directly from the organization. But if not, you might consider, if you're looking at endorsing somebody, figuring out, hey, have they done this? If not, what's out there? All right, so I'm not going to beat that dead horse. We will have Joanne on sometime soon. I need to text her when I get done recording this and schedule a time for us to do an interview. So hopefully that'll be coming out maybe in January. But we're going to shift gears over to campaign organization. And at My Campaign Coach, we spend a lot of time looking at the logistics side. It's really the unsexy side of campaigns, but it's really where you're going to win or lose. One of the former commandants of the Marine Corps, he said that amateurs talk about tactics, professionals study logistics, and I could not agree more with that sentiment. If you're able to have this grand strategy put together about how you're going to knock all these doors and you're going to have this great messaging campaign and have these great speeches with awesome backgrounds and advanced work, but you fail to account for the logistics of how you get people paid, how you actually knock the doors, how you identify your voters, how you get mail out on time, the unsexy stuff, then you're going to fail. It's that simple. So we spent a lot of work helping to design a great logistics backend and training our candidates on how to do that. And in order to help do that, we've broken down campaigns into 5 primary systems because we like to systematize as much as possible, really helping lower failure rates and the amount of time we have to spend on repetitive activities. So we broken this campaign down into 5 major systems. It's finance, logistics, air, ground, and strategy. And happens to come up with a nice acronym, FLAGS. So the FLAGS framework is what we call it: finance, logistics, air, ground, and strategy. And so under those 5 systems falls every subsystem of a campaign, whether that's payroll or your budget, your bookkeeping, your radio, vendor management, all of your contact, your recruiting of your walkers, your ground ops plan, your branding, your strategic goals and research. All that stuff falls under one of those major systems. And the subsystems that fall in there are going to be determined in large part by what type of campaign you're running, how large it is, how many facets you've got. So a city council race that is pretty much yard signs and block walking and maybe a newspaper ad is going to have many fewer subsystems than a congressional campaign, which is going to have everything from social media to polling to communications to press and all those things. So you really get to build those subsystems as you need them. And then within each of those subsystems, you identify the different activities, the different processes that you're going to be executing. So those could be small things like cutting block walking lists, or training your canvassers, or paying your vendors, or whatever it might be, running your payroll. So the idea is that we start to identify as much in advance as possible what those subsystems and processes are, and then we'll put down some notes so the next time, or the second time when I'm going to execute a repetitive activity, I can look at my checklist and I can make sure that I'm able to do it with less thought and decision making and have a lower failure rate. We use these processes internally on our side with our block walking teams and with our campaign coaching, and I highly recommend you use them on the campaign side. The biggest reason people don't do it is because it takes time, but that's really short-sighted because it saves you a lot of time in the long run. For instance, if I know that I'm going to be training my block walkers every week, I'm training new canvassers, volunteers, etc., then if I spend an extra hour or so writing down my process and planning some of the stuff out, and maybe even writing up some materials I could just hand out to my canvassers, I could save hours per week and definitely hours every month of my manager or my field reps time and train these volunteers, and make sure that they're always trained better and able to deploy them faster, which equates to more time actually out knocking doors and more voters contacted. So one of the things I recommend, we have this tool, I'll link to it in the show notes. It's basically how to build an awesome voter canvassing briefing sheet. It's a multi-page document that has everything from the canvassing app instructions to a note from the candidate and talking points in the survey. And it doesn't take long to put that together, but it saves the canvassing manager's time, the trainer's time, every time they go out to train a new canvasser. So it cuts a lot of time, and a lot of the simple questions takes them off the to-do list on that Saturday before they go out block walking. Then it's also going to make sure that the volunteer or the canvasser is better prepared when they're going door to door, because they've got this stuff in their back pocket. It's got a list of things to not forget when they're going out the door, getting ready to go knock doors, so that they're not having to turn back around when they're 15 minutes away from their house to go pick this stuff up. And so it's going to make them better overall. But like I said, it takes you maybe 30, 45 minutes and asking a couple questions to the strategic team to make sure that you've got all that done right. So we're going to look for different ways we can systematize those things and process out our different activities. And if you look really hard for those opportunities, then you're going to be able to save time over and over and over again. And so that basically means you're buying new hours in the day. And so we can't get more time, can't get more days in our campaign calendar, but if we're efficient with how we use that, then we can be really, really effective. And so in our advanced candidate course and all the different things that we do in our coaching, we really focus heavily on let's save time where we can, because you can't buy more. All right, so one of the things that was asked specifically about in Facebook was the campaign calendar. And this is really, really important because a lot of people don't do it the right way. They start out from when they announce. That's the first day on their calendar, and they plan out from there as far as all their different activities and everything else. I recommend the opposite approach. I start with election day when the polls close, and I work backwards. You might even put a little bit of time if you need to help have the morale boost. You can plan out a little bit about your victory party if you want to, but the idea is we plan from election day backwards, because we want to be building towards having the resources, both in personnel and all of the financial resources ahead of time, so that we're ready for that. Generally speaking, the vast majority of your money spent is going to be in the last few weeks of a campaign, preceding early voting and through that time frame. So, on through election day. So we're going to have to be building up to that, and there's a lot of logistics that you got to put in place. So we're going to start at election day. I want to plan out, what are we going to do on election day? What's that going to look like? How many polling locations are we likely to have open? And how many shifts do we need to have for poll watchers? Do we need to have people designated or help the county or the Republican Party find people to be observers in the polls to help make sure there's no shenanigans going on? What about yard signs? How many signs do we want to have out per polling location? And then we can put a note in there. Okay, we got to be able to buy these. How much in advance do we need to buy these signs? We got to think about all these different variables, palm cards to hand out to voters. We got to think about how we might try to get people to the polls. All these things we got to start planning out well in advance. So we start on election day, work backwards. So then we start looking after we have considered election day and say, okay, what about early voting? So how are we going to be identifying our voters? Well, we need to think about within our software system, being able to identify likely supporters, undecideds, and folks we haven't talked to. And say, okay, so we're going to be shifting heavily during, maybe we're going to say that our canvassing efforts are going to be to turning out known supporters, that our phone calling efforts are going to be to talk to undecided and to unknowns. And then we're also going to have our poll watchers and our greeters at these different locations, where however many are early voting locations. The idea being that you start at the very end and you work backwards so that you're identifying every phase, what do we need to have available? And you're making a list the whole way through, saying, okay, these are the questions I can answer with my strategic team. These are the resources we know that we have to have available in terms of man hours and actual hard assets, as far the collateral or money on hand to pay people, etc. So work backwards in that. And then, of course, once we get before early voting, we got our window where we're trying to identify and persuade final voters before we turn to get out to vote. We have to figure out what's our absentee process. What are we going to be doing to chase those absentee ballots? Who do we need to go talk to at the county every day to get the absentee request list? And then what are we going to mail to those people? And we'll figure out, okay, how many mail pieces are we going to send and when are we going to send those out? So by working backwards, you're really able to have a much better grasp on the resource you need and to put those big things down on the calendar. From there, you'll start to figure out, okay, so what are the regular, weekly or monthly events that we have to have on the calendar? Okay, so the ones that we want to have the candidate go to or the staff, we'll look at when would we ideally like to have coffees scheduled? When would we want to have bigger meet and greets? What's our filing deadline? Can we make sure we get on the ballot? If we're doing the donation or the pay the filing fee route, we got to know how we're going to get that money and make sure that's earmarked so we have the money in the bank, the check will clear. If we're going the signature route, we got to have a plan for getting signatures, enough of them early enough so that we can get on the ballot that way. So you got to ask yourself all these questions, and by starting at the end and working backwards, you have a really good, clear picture of what you need. And so by the time you work your calendar all the way back to where you're at, you now have a pretty good idea of what the resource you're going to have and when you're going to need to have them. So you know what your money spend rate, your burn rate is going to look like, and how many volunteers you need at different points. You will have started already charting out your block walking numbers, and this all of a sudden becomes very, very clear. So from there, you may have to go back through and start filling out some of your message calendar stuff, but that's not necessarily from the logistics side of the campaign what I'm talking about. We can fill in lots of extra messaging and all those different things on the calendar after the fact. I want to start out with a logistical pass to figure out the infrastructure side of what I need for a campaign. All right, so when we're actually looking at, once we've built out the flags framework, so we've got those systems and major subsystems, and maybe we've already started at least identify some of the process we need to build. The next part of that is going to be the actual campaign organization, because that does not necessarily equate to your org chart. Each of those subsystems and major systems will be assigned to somebody as the one with primary responsibility. Somebody in your org chart is going to own that, so that in your meetings, in all of your discussions of who needs to do what, you're going to know who the buck stops with. And of course, the candidate is at the top of that with the GC right next to him. But when you're doing that, you got to also think about it from the perspective of an org chart. And that's going to be much more of, you have the candidate, you have a GC and a campaign, the general consultant and the campaign manager are all kind of your top three positions. And then based on the size of your campaign and your budget, you're going to have different roles within that. And some of those might be, communications director, political director, finance director. I might have a campaign aide or intern. You have a grassroots coordinator. Might have field directors or volunteer coordinators. Obviously, if you're talking about a U.S. Senate campaign versus a city council campaign, there's going to be vast differences in the size of the staff on there. But in some cases, you can find great volunteers. If you're a smaller campaign, you find a volunteer that can fill that role. when you're identifying those people to fill volunteer roles, especially if they're some very important ones as far as campaign internal stuff, you want to make sure that there's a reason other than they're your brother-in-law or other than your heart up and you find somebody who said they have experienced this, that they're filling that role. You want to look at their experience and make sure that personality-wise they're a good fit with you and the leadership team of the campaign, and that experience-wise they actually have a history of good work product. I've seen several times when a candidate just launched their campaign and they have somebody says, oh yeah, I'm really good at social media. I would love to handle, I'll do that for free. And then they quickly find out they get what they pay for. So when you're bringing people in, actually, especially if they're going to be effectively part of your staff, even if they're unpaid, actually have a hiring process, actually talk through with them, hey, this is what I need from you. If you say yes to this, this is what the kind of deliverables I'm going to have that I'm requesting of you, and I'm going to treat you like a staffer. Because having somebody that you're counting on as a staffer, but you can't kick in the butt and say, hey, man, I've got to have this today. You got to get this in there or I'm going to have to replace you. If you can't have that conversation with somebody, it's going to make the relationship much harder to keep profitable for the campaign. And that's really the first and foremost thing we care about is winning this campaign and promoting the principles that we believe in. So we've got to make sure personalities don't get in the way of that. Now, most campaigns should have, but beyond the candidate, they always have a campaign manager, somebody that's responsible for a lot of the logistical functions and keeping as much administrative work off the candidate's plate as possible. From a candidate's perspective, time not spent talking to voters or donors is largely lost time. I don't want the candidate worried about where we block walking today, where I'm block walking today as a candidate. I sure don't want them worried about the script or updates or the voter universe or the different variables that go into the canvassing operation from a volunteer paid staff side. The campaign manager or one of the field staffers should be responsible for creating reports and giving the candidate that information to keep their comfort level high while not necessarily having to, they shouldn't have to gather that information themselves. They shouldn't be in the weeds on that. That's why you got to have a campaign staff you trust because they're filtering a lot of this information before it gets to you, helping make sure that it's easily digestible and in the most compressed format. Beyond that, you're probably going to have a team of vendors. So you may have a general consultant or somebody that's helping from the strategic side. They have a lot of vendor relationships that they're helping bring to the table, and they've run races before. So they're some of the ones that are going to help give you top-level strategic advice. They're going to help you identify the people that you need to use for mail and for a lot of the areas within the campaign where you need vendors, not necessarily staff. And depending on the size of your campaign, some of your social media functions, your advertising, your mail, your phones, some of those things, depending on what your budget priorities are and the size, may be internal, where you're actually running those yourself, or you may outsource those in their entirety. For instance, if you're doing a large canvassing operation and you have volunteers and paid staff internal, but towards the end of a campaign you need some paid canvassing, like one of my companies does, you might be externalizing and handing off and saying, okay, well, these 10,000 voters, I need to pay some outside vendor to go contact. And so that, even though canvassing is largely an internal function, that would now become an external vendor function. So somebody's have to be tracking that, and most of the time that's going to be the same person that's running the rest of your canvassing, but that's under the general consultant. They're generally the one that's kind of running herd on all the vendors, making sure they're doing their job. Generally speaking, within the campaign management side, or the campaign manager, that's where you have the other primary offices, so like finance, communications, political. And political is a lot of times where your canvassing operations and most of your voter contact happens, all the stuff that is not run through the vendors like mail, TV, radio, those kind of things. That's where you got to have good communication between your internal team and through your GC to your external vendors, because the information that your canvassers are gathering, that you're hearing on the ground, all that stuff is going to help inform the activities of the actual the team that's doing your mail and other air war functions like TV, radio, etc. So that's where you got to have good communications. You got to have regular team meetings between the primaries and these different things. These should have an agenda. You should have somebody that's dedicated to running those, somebody that's dedicated to taking notes on those. They should not be meetings that should have been emails. These are regular times where you have a specific agenda items. I would always recommend that you do not discuss things that have not been cleared ahead of time. So the campaign manager, the GC, should be the one confirming the agenda. They're the one running the meeting. And so anything that is going to be discussed needs to be on the agenda beforehand, so the agenda can be circulated and all the different people can have time to think about it and be able to ask themselves important questions, prepare important briefs, so that you can actually have a good discussion where things actually get done and things get decided. This is a really tough thing given how fast dynamic campaigns are. But if you don't do them right, then they're just going to be interminable calls where nothing gets done, and people look back after when they get done and it's just like, why the heck did I just waste an hour of my life? So all these people on the calls are important to the campaign. They have their time is important and valuable, and so we want to make sure we respect that. And planning out these meetings ahead of time is a really great way to make sure that actually happens. So the last thing we're going to talk about is how you actually can contact voters. So there are a lot of different ways, and there will be some that I'm not going to remember to mention here today. But one of the ones you've heard me talk about a lot before is canvassing, and that's where you're going to somebody's door, you're asking them what they care about, you've targeted them based on their voting patterns or the consumer data you have that you purchased about them, so you think that they're a likely or a possible supporter, and now we're going to go talk to them and try to get their support. That's always one of my favorites because science is proven and anecdotes abound about how this is the most effective way for you to get somebody to vote for you. Show up at the door, smile at them, communicate why you're there, why you're supporting this candidate, and ask for their support. Beyond that, though, there's a lot of other ones. There's social media, where that's another one where you're able to highly target your contacts. One of my favorite things for candidates to do when there's somebody that does well in this medium is video. We'll talk more in a future episode about how I like to run video and some good budget-friendly ways to do that. But using your phone, on your computer, whatever it is, to be able to have, whether it's Facebook Lives or cutting some short videos, this is a great way to personalize yourself to your supporters and to be able to get content out there that people can find out more about you. Because I think that one of the biggest barriers that a lot of candidates have with getting their name out there and getting support is that it's too easy to just think of someone run for office as another politician. It's really easy to fall in that trap. So we want to be able to break through that, and one of the best ways is to actually get your face out there, show your personality, show pictures of your kids, show pictures of you doing stuff off the campaign trail, and the humor side of you, what you are like. Get the candid takes of what when you're talking about stuff on the campaign trail. This is something that not every candidate is comfortable with, though. For instance, I'll give you two examples. One, Will Hurd and Beto O'Rourke were one Democrat, one Republican. A year or so ago, they had to drive from their districts out in West Texas all the way to D.C. I think like a flight got canceled or something happened. They couldn't fly out there, and so they had to drive. And so they did Facebook Live, and they both live tweeted most of this road trip, this bipartisan road trip. Now, both these are younger guys that are really comfortable with social media. They've had a lot of experience on that, and so they were comfortable with it and had a lot of fun with it, and it really did a lot to help show their personalities, and it was a cool thing. They got a lot of earned media coverage. On the other hand, during the last presidential campaign when Rand Paul was running, they did this one day where there's like a 24-hour live stream of the day in his campaign. And by the end of the campaign, he was like cussing under his breath and just ticked off. He was obviously not comfortable with it and didn't like it. And I'll tell you that live streaming a whole day in somebody's life is a pretty bad deal. I would not recommend any candidate do that because it's more Truman Show than it is good campaign stuff. But it was a kind of a gimmick, and they gambled on it, and it got them a lot of earned media. But by the end of it, Rand was just like, turn the dang thing off. This is just driving me nuts. And it's really hard to have every moment of your life, every part of a day even, be on video and just talking with people through that. So you got those two examples. Obviously, if you're a campaign manager or you're a candidate, find where you're comfortable and get feedback, especially for the candidate, from other people within your orbit, within your kitchen cabinet and your campaign staff, and say, okay, so what do you think are the best mediums for me to communicate? For some people, that may be audio. That it may be just talking. And so maybe you can have a campaign podcast. You can do some short snippets that get put out there turn them into videos on Facebook or on YouTube. You can give different briefings, whatever that people can download and listen to. You can get on the radio a bunch. Many different things there. If it's pictures, okay. Well, if you look good on picture on the camera, but you're not somebody that's comfortable talking in front of one, then do a lot of pictures. Take a lot of pictures with voters now on the campaign trail. If you're somebody that's great on video, that's awesome because that's an incredibly powerful medium in and of itself. And so do a lot of video. You don't have to post everything. You don't have to do everything on Facebook Live, but you can do some, and you can be thinking about what are opportunities, what are moments that we could use for good video. Whether it's in the car, ask the candidate for an update as they're driving around. Is it when they're talking to a voter saying, hey, would you mind just us recording us talking for a minute and you telling the camera why you're supporting me? That'd be awesome. Live streaming events, talking to the campaign on the campaign channel about your beliefs on an important issue that people are talking about, whatever it might be. There are tons of opportunities, and once you understand what the mediums are that you're comfortable with, you can then look for those chances to break in with your favored medium of communication. You've also got things like having coffees and meet and greets. These are some of my favorites, especially when it comes down to coffee. So more of a meet and greet is where the campaign says, hey, we want to hit this town, and so we're going to rent out this little space, and we're going to organize this. More of what I consider the coffee deal is where if you find a supporter in a neighborhood and you say, hey, I would love to meet some of your friends and neighbors, and I would love to get a chance to talk to them. Would you consider having a little coffee clutch thing where you invite some of your friends and neighbors over? We'll find a time that works the campaign, and we'll show up. I'll talk for a minute, but the main thing is to be able to meet some of your friends and family and neighbors. And so it's you have the voter themselves organizing the guest list. You might be able to invite some people too. The campaign pays for some coffee and donuts, and you come over and you just have an opportunity to meet people who you would otherwise not have access to. It's generally very informal. It's not too long. You can kind of make that whatever you want, and it's not very structured. You don't have the overhead of renting out a space or paying a meal minimum, something like that. You've also got things like fairs and parades. These are more things you find on the community calendars or events that you might become aware of that you can go out to and find target-rich environments, people out there that are already thinking and aware of what's going on with the campaign and at large. And so you can actually get to go talk to them about what's happening and meet them when they're out and about. The downside of these is typically your conversation time is pretty low. You're shaking a hand, smiling, kissing a baby, and then walking on to the next person. So it's not nearly as intimate, but you do get to have that personal contact with them. Of course, you got the traditional air war stuff like direct mail, TV, and radio. These all have a place depending on the size of your campaign and your budget. But I would recommend that you think seriously about weighting your activities towards other mediums, towards the more personal ones, especially because you can target them much better. With direct mail, you have some targeting ability based on what you know of their voter patterns and those kind of things. You can target their addresses. But your time that somebody's going to spend on a direct mail piece, especially more than a few weeks out from an election, is really low. And once you get within a few weeks of an election, everybody's using direct mail. So you're going out to your mailbox and it's full of these glossy full-page mailers. So people don't pay a lot of attention to them. They look for pretty pictures, bullet points in your name, and that's about it. So 7 seconds is about what people spend on those. With TV and radio, you have very, very little ability to target those. So you're paying to touch a lot of people out there who are not going to vote for you or possibly even vote in your election. So I like to target my budget spending as much as I can. So that's where canvassing, social media, the coffees and meet and greets, the fairs and the parades, where they are much more likely to be the things that I'm spending money on. Overall, your voter contact should be about 65 to 75% of your campaign spend. And I like to see about half of that, if not more, especially on my medium or smaller size races, going towards direct voter contact, so towards the canvassing side of things and some of those coffees and meet and greets. Actual one-on-one attention from the campaign, whether through the candidate or through one of the campaign volunteers or staff or something like that. Well, guys, I think that's about what we have for you today. I hopefully had some good tips there that you guys will be able to use in your campaigns. I'm really excited after the filing deadline to see the number of the good guys here in Texas that did not get challengers, and the just a huge number of good folks that we have that are first-time candidates as conservatives that are running in the primaries. So it's going to be a fun year here in Texas. I got a couple of my buddies running for, and former Cruz alumni running for Congress, so that's going to be fun for me to help out with. If you want to go check out more about the new pricing on the different courses that we have through My Campaign Coach, go over to learn.mycampaigncoach.com or just go to the How We Help You Win option at the top of the My Campaign Coach homepage. Either one of those take you over there. It's $49 a month if you want to get the advanced candidate course, or $249 if you want to buy lifetime access to it. Both of those, whatever works best for your budget. It's a good way to get a lot of good information, free downloads, the group coaching during your time on there. It's just great information that you can use and hopefully will help you win. Of course, we also got the free course on there to make sure that you're prepared to run and help you answer some of those basic campaign questions that are going to determine whether you win or lose on Election Day. Hope you guys have an awesome week. Make sure that you ping me if you got any thoughts about the new format or if you got any subjects you'd like to hear me cover in the future. And if you got somebody you think I'd interview, give me a shout as well. Raz, R-A-Z, at mycampaigncoach.com. You guys have a great week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.